Come closer to the hearth. You don't need to have anything figured out before you sit here. You don't need to make what you're carrying sound prettier than it is. Just come sit for a while. I'm Moonray, and this is the first time I've done this, which feels strange to admit because I've spent a very long time finding ways to speak without actually using my voice. I write, I create, I make things with my hands. I build little worlds out of words and colors and herbs and old memories. But sitting here, actually speaking, feels different. On July 3rd, I turned 37. And in the days since, there's something I haven't been able to stop thinking about. I never thought I'd see this birthday. Before we go any further, I do want to tell you something. This conversation touches on childhood trauma, abuse, CPTSD, depression, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, pregnancy loss, and death. I'm not going to describe those things graphically, but I am going to speak about them honestly. So if today isn't the day for you to sit with those things, that's okay. The hearth will still be here. I think I've said some version of I've never thought I'd see this birthday since I turned 15. For a long time, I thought I understood why. When I was 11 years old, my best friend died in a car accident. She was only a few weeks away from her 15th birthday, and I was 11. I don't think anyone really sat down with me and helped me understand what happened. No one explained grief to me. No one explained the randomness of death. No one helped an 11-year-old child understand that because something happened to someone else, it didn't mean the same thing was waiting for her. So I made sense of it in a way that a child sometimes makes sense of impossible things. I thought, if it happened to her, it could happen to me. And somewhere in my mind, 15 became a boundary. Her life ended there, so I think part of me expected mine to as well. But lately I realized that the story actually begins before that. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a ballerina. And I don't mean that in the vague way little kids sometimes say they want to be an astronaut one week and a veterinarian the next. I loved dancing. I loved moving my body, and I was good at it. I was very good at interpretive dance. I was featured in my school plays. Movement just made sense to me. And I had this very specific picture of who I would become. I was going to move to a big city. I was going to be a professional ballerina. But I wasn't going to look like a delicate pastel version of a ballerina people might expect. I was going to be dark, gothic, edgy. Apparently, I had already decided that if I was going to be a ballerina, I was going to be a slightly unsettling one, which honestly tracks. But I could see her, that future version of me. I knew how she moved, I knew how she looked, I knew how she felt. And then, when I was 8 years old, I found out I had very aggressive scoliosis. I ended up with a double curve in my spine. The top curve was 65 degrees, and the lower curve was 35. At the last doctor's appointment I can clearly remember before my surgery, I was told that my spine was moving in such a way that I may end up only having a few weeks left to live. My spine was going to puncture my lung. I was 10. A life-saving surgery was scheduled. I had rods put in my back, and then I spent about a year bedridden in recovery. I survived. That's the strange thing about survival that I don't think we talk enough about. Sometimes everybody's so relieved that you survived that no one really notices what survival had cost you. After my surgery, I was told I couldn't dance anymore. My spine doesn't bend. The rods did what they were supposed to do. They kept me alive, but the ballerina disappeared. I haven't danced since I was a young child, and I still grieve her constantly. Watching other people dance aches, because I look at them and there's a part of me that knows exactly what their bodies are doing. I can feel the movement. I know where the muscles go. I know the language. My muscles remember still. That's probably not grammatically correct, but it's true. My muscles remember still. I can move that way, but I can't. And dancing wasn't the only future I had imagined. The only other thing I ever really known I wanted was to be a mother. And after my surgery, I was told I shouldn't or couldn't have children. I never really believed that one. Maybe that's stubbornness. Maybe that's intuition. Maybe that's just me being me. But I remember thinking, women shorter than me have had babies. I can't bend my spine, but I still have my stomach muscles. I trusted that my body would grow however it needed to grow. I trusted that I could push a baby out. I don't know why. I just did. It's interesting to me now. I believed them about dancing. That restriction became law. I stopped. But motherhood? Some part of me quietly said, no. By the time I was 16, I was studying lactation. No one really knew that. I had left public school when I was 14 and started homeschooling. And when I say homeschooling, I was basically teaching myself. My mother had dropped out of school in 8th grade. That's a whole nother story for another fire. But I still graduated at 17, and I spent as much time as I could in the library. I read every book they had on lactation. Every single one. Because I knew that if I ever became a mother, I wanted to breastfeed my children. I had always been drawn to herbs, natural remedies, and living as close to nature as I could. And I thought lactation knowledge could help me as a mother. Maybe it could become sustainable income. And if nothing else, maybe I could help other women. I didn't tell people I was doing this. I wasn't walking around announcing that I was preparing for the children doctors had me believe that I couldn't have. I just prepared. I think I gave up on imagination fairly early in life, but apparently I didn't entirely give up on preparation. Maybe that's something I've done for most of my life. I hide hope inside of research. I made the dream practical enough that it can sneak past the part of me that's afraid to want it. Because by 11, I had already learned that futures disappear. I had imagined myself dancing. That disappeared. I had been told motherhood wasn't supposed to belong to me, and my best friend died. So I stopped looking very far ahead. Growing up undiagnosed autistic and living in abuse I didn't yet understand was abuse, I became a very depressed teenager. I struggled with self-harm. I struggled with suicidal thoughts. And when I was 13, I was institutionalized for a while. There's a lot inside that sentence. More than I'm going to unpack today. But I think it's important to say this. You don't always know it's abuse when you're living it as a child. You just know it's life. You learn the rules of the room. You learn the sound of footsteps. You learn which version of yourself is safest. You learn to read people before you learn to read yourself. And when that's simply the world you've always lived in, you don't necessarily look around and say, I'm being abused. Sometimes you just think, there must be something wrong with me. When I was 17, my maternal grandmother died suddenly from a very aggressive strain of pneumonia. My grandmother was my safe person. And when she died, I knew. I knew things in my mother's life would get worse. I knew things between my mother and me would get worse. And they did. But even still, I couldn't quite see it. That's something I've thought about a lot. I could predict the danger created by losing my safe person without being able to name the person I needed safety from. Trauma is strange like that. The body can know something long before the mind has language for it. And then, at 23, I became pregnant. My first pregnancy was physically beautiful. It was textbook healthy. My body did exactly what I always trusted it to do. It grew. It accommodated my baby. My spine didn't bend. The rods didn't disappear. My body simply found another way. Physically, I was fine. Emotionally, I was not. The man who had gotten me pregnant became verbally abusive. He abandoned me. He threatened me. He tried to force me into having an abortion. And I want to speak about this part carefully, not because I'm ashamed of my daughter, and not because I want to turn my story into a political argument about someone else's body or someone else's choices. This is my story, and in my story, I did not want an abortion. We had planned the pregnancy. I wanted my baby, but I was scared. I was scared of whether I could do it alone, and I allowed someone else's pressure and doubts to influence me so deeply that I ended up on that table, prepared for an abortion I did not want. That's still difficult for me to admit. Not because I didn't love my baby, but because I hate knowing that I let another person influence my decisions in such a profound way. I remember sitting there, knowing this tiny baby was about to be removed from my body. And something happened. I don't know where the strength came from, but I said no. I told the nurses I couldn't do it. And that was my first act in protecting her. After I had said no, I caught a glimpse of the ultrasound monitor behind me, and I saw my baby for the first time. He looked like a little bean, just this tiny little shape on a screen. And I was bound and determined that I would do whatever I needed to do to keep her safe. I was her mother. I knew I was her mother from the very start. I think something changed in me when she came into my life. She made me want to live. And, if I'm being completely truthful, she also made dying feel like something I was no longer allowed to do. It was both. She grew my backbone, which is a very strange metaphor for a woman with metal rods in her spine. But she did. I started standing up for myself. And that's when the abuse from my mother first started becoming visible to me. Because there were things that had happened to me, things that I had accepted as normal, that I looked at my daughter and I knew I would never allow to happen to her. That's one of the cruel ways cycles begin to break. Sometimes you don't realize you deserve protection until you're protecting someone else. You look at this tiny person and you think, no one will do that to you. And then, very quietly, another thought appears. Wait, someone did that to me. With the help of my grandfather, I put myself through online schooling. I became a certified lactation specialist. The 16-year-old girl who had quietly read every lactation book in the library finally turned all that preparation into something tangible. And I graduated at the top of my class. My mother didn't seem particularly happy about that. In fact, she seemed almost disdainful. And there are probably stories inside that, too. There are stories everywhere in my life. But I had done it. I had built something. Years later, when I was 28, I experienced 2 miscarriages within 3 months. I did not handle that grief well. I had spent so much of my life trusting my body when it came to pregnancy, and suddenly, loss. Twice. I considered leaving my husband, not because he had done something terrible, but I was drowning. And sometimes when you've spent your whole life surviving rooms, your instinct is to leave the room, even when the room isn't the thing hurting you. My husband told me that if I truly wanted to leave, that I could. But he begged me to try therapy first, as a last resort. So I did. And I went into therapy thinking I was only grieving my babies. I was. I absolutely was. But there was more. There was autistic burnout. And there was CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I didn't understand the diagnosis at first. I remember wondering, why? Why would I have CPTSD? Because you don't know it's abuse when you're living it as a child. And apparently, sometimes you could become an adult and still need someone to help you turn around and look at it. Therapy gave me words. It didn't magically fix me. A diagnosis didn't make my body suddenly realize the danger was over. It didn't erase the grief. It didn't make me perfectly regulated. It didn't turn me into someone who never freezes or fawns or reads a room before she checks in with herself. I'm still working on it. My journey with CPTSD has only begun in a lot of ways. And now, I'm 37. I said I've never thought I'd see this birthday every year since 15. But 37 felt different. Because about a week before my birthday, my oldest daughter came and sat with me. She's 12. She's approaching 13. 13. I think about the things I had already experienced by the time I was her age. A spine that was threatening my life, major surgery, a year in bed, losing Vance, being told I shouldn't have children, my best friend's death, depression, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, it's being institutionalized, countless other things that I may never even speak on. And here was my 12-year-old daughter, sitting beside me, talking to me. She told me I was a great mom. She told me I made her feel comfortable with all the things a 12-year-old girl naturally goes through. And I think something in me finally became still enough to notice. I was the woman I had once desperately wished I could have in my own life. I worry constantly about whether I'm a good mother. I worry about whether I'm breaking the patterns well enough. I have 6 children. I have 3 spirit babies. I've had 5 home births. I free-birthed my twins. I've been married for more than a decade to my best friend, and we've survived things together. We've overcome some things together. And still, I worry. Am I doing enough? Am I healing enough? Am I breaking enough of it? And then my daughter sat beside me, safe, comfortable, talking to me about her body and her life, and she told me I was a good mom. Evidence. There it was. Not evidence that I'm perfect, not evidence that every pattern has been broken, and not evidence that my children will never have a pain or need therapy or one day look at something I did and say, Mom, what the hell? I'm still human. I make mistakes. But there was evidence that something had changed. The little girl who secretly read every lactation book in the library became a mother. The child who learned to read the room became a woman trying to create a room where her children feel safe. The girl who stopped imagining a future turned 37. I thought this first episode was going to be all about the reasons I never expected to live this long. And there are many. There are stories I haven't told you. There are stories I'm not ready to tell you. And there are probably stories I don't even realize are stories yet. But maybe this isn't really the episode about why I thought I would die. Maybe it's about finally looking around and noticing that I had lived. And then before I leave you tonight, I want to say something about this hearth, because I think it's important. I have a lot of trauma, and that's simply true. And if you sit beside this fire with me long enough, some of those stories are probably going to come out. Not because I'm asking you to feel sorry for me, and not because I'm collecting sympathy, not because I believe pain is the most interesting thing about me. They will come out simply because they are part of my story. And I promised myself that the hearth would be a place for raw stories. A safe space for people to bring parts of themselves that don't always know how to make pretty. But the truth is, the hearth became a safe space for others because it began as mine. I built the place that I needed. Maybe I've been doing that my entire life. I couldn't find the woman I needed when I was little, so somehow I became her. I couldn't always find a room where I felt safe enough to exist without reading everybody else first, so I built one. I lit a fire, I pulled up a chair, and now I'm telling you, come closer. Maybe you didn't think you'd make it this far either. Maybe you did. But the person who arrived here looks nothing like the person you thought you would become. I think there are versions of us who spend years carrying us toward a life they never quite get to live. The child who learned how to survive the room. The woman who kept going because someone else needed her to. The version of you who became very good at disappearing without ever actually leaving. Maybe we don't have to hate them for the ways they learned to keep us safe. Maybe we could thank them, and maybe we can let them rest. I'm Moonray. Thank you for sitting beside the fire with me. Until next time, tend gently to what is still becoming.